They're on every street corner, in every office park and airport, and have been parodied and called dumb. It's possible your name has likely been misspelled on one of their cups. But with 30,000 stores across the planet, Starbucks is anything but dumb. In fact, they're stupid successful. What started as a single store in Seattle at a time when cafes had a fraction of the presence they have today has now become a global brand with a market cap over $100 billion and $23.5 billion in annual revenue. The first Starbucks store opened in 1971 at 1912 Pike Place, Seattle, USA. It was started by 3 college friends, 2 teachers and 1 writer. Surprisingly, they all shared a love for coffee and free Wi-Fi, if it had been invented yet. Fortunately for them, they had a mentor, an Alfred Pete, whose name you may recognize. We'll get to that later. In its first decade of operation, Starbucks opened 5 more stores in Seattle, at a time when U.S. consumers were only accustomed to buying coffee beans, not coffee drinks from stores. So what changed? Enter Howard Schultz. Inspired by the coffee shop culture of Milan, he helped turn Starbucks locations from simply stores into cafes. His goal was to educate Americans on the cafe experience. So rather than just get them to buy beans, they'd be buying lattes and interesting coffees. Pumpkin spice was still decades away. By 1987, Schultz had already left Starbucks to start his own coffee shop brand. But that same year, he acquired Starbucks from the 2 teachers and a writer, who decided to focus on a different coffee brand, Peet's Coffee. This was a key inflection point in Starbucks' growth, as it went from its handful of locations in Seattle to 165 across the U.S. by 1992, when Starbucks IPO'd on the NASDAQ. By 1996, it had over 1,000 stores and started to dip its toes internationally, starting with Asia. And by 2007, it had over 15,000 stores, adding over 1,500 stores a year.
My Starbucks order is a venti dark roast hot with 2 stevia and a splash of oat milk.
Iced matcha latte with oat milk.
Venti dark roast, no cream, no sugar.
Grande aged Sumatra, black. Starbucks has an amazing ability to create loyalty. And that creation of loyalty comes from convenience and from being on every corner. And you actually see a network effect of presence in a market. So the more stores you have in a market, the more that your brand can be part of the everyday experience. Yes, there are lots of Starbucks in just about every downtown neighborhood in America, and that's a good thing.
Then, 2008 happened. With the Great Recession in full swing, consumers started to reevaluate their discretionary purchases.
My name is Bethany, and I worked for Starbucks for 12 years. What I noticed about Starbucks that changed the most was it suddenly didn't become about the coffee anymore, and this is why Howard Schultz needed to come back.
Schultz, who had left the helm of Starbucks in 2000, was called back to right the ship, focusing on 3 key factors: consumer experience, working conditions, and shuttering poor-performing stores.
Suddenly, we weren't just selling coffee, we were selling sandwiches, we were selling CDs, DVDs, books, and you would walk into a Starbucks store and not smell coffee anymore.
Thanks to his vision and operational expertise, Starbucks returned to its high-growth trajectory in 2013, and today has over 30,000 stores. In the U.S. coffee market alone, Starbucks has a 40% share in the $47.5 billion coffee market. So how did Starbucks get this venti? By having a diversity of income streams, including operating the brands Teavana, Evolution Fresh, and Starbucks Reserve. Starbucks revenue can be broken down 3 ways: company-operated stores, licensed stores, and other. Starbucks company-operated stores are what you and I are most familiar with. It's where we order our cold brew and breakfast sandwiches, where we score some free Wi-Fi and get our free birthday drink thanks to their Stars loyalty program. Company-operated stores drove 81% of total net revenues in fiscal 2020. Not surprisingly, 75% of company-operated store revenue comes from beverages. If you've seen a Starbucks inside a grocery store or other brick-and-mortar location selling coffee and products, This is where their licensed store business comes into play. 10% of total net revenue in fiscal 2020 was driven by Starbucks licensed stores. These stores generally have a lower gross margin and a higher operating margin than company-operated stores. But why is that? Let's say you're a potential licensor, like the owner of a grocery store chain. You think you can generate additional profit selling Starbucks in your stores. So you pay a premium on branded products and supplies that Starbucks pockets on revenue. Then, for each retail sale, you pay a small royalty fee. Anything you make after that, it's all profit. Now, because Starbucks only takes a small cut of supplies and sales, their gross margins are lower than if they operated their own store. However, since they are not operating their own store, they do not have to cover any operating costs and capital investment in terms of building out the store and ensuring it's properly staffed, meaning that Starbucks can enjoy higher operating margins at these locations. An important distinction here is licensing is different than franchising. This means that you can't open your own Starbucks because Starbucks themselves have to operate it. Sorry, Nathan.
My entire marketing plan depended on using their corporate logo to get attention, and the only way to legally do it is by using dumb.
Finally, we have the other segment, which is derived from sales of customers outside the company-operated and licensed stores, in addition to royalties received from Nestle under the Global Coffee Alliance. Speaking of which, let's talk about Starbucks business segmentation. It breaks down into 4 different trunks: Americas, International, Channel Development, aka that umbrella of brands sold outside the company and licensed stores, and lastly, Corporate and Other, which includes unallocated corporate expenses and non-reporting operating segments like Evolution Fresh. Segmenting like this allowed Starbucks to showcase its international growth separate from its core Americas business. We've all seen how Starbucks has saturated the market in the US, while its international growth has required more support relative to their revenue.
At the end of the street, there was a Starbucks. And directly across from that Starbucks, in the exact same building as that Starbucks, was another Starbucks.
If you go into a Starbucks store in lots of Asia or even parts of Europe, cheesecake is one of the major things that's on the menu. That doesn't happen in the US. It's not what people want. But what Starbucks doesn't do is change the meaning of the brand. It's coffee forward. It's about community, it's about connection, it's about that consistency, it's about the care that's given by the barista to the customer. Those things are immutable and can never change.
Let's ground this down into finer numbers. Breaking down financials for this segment for fiscal 2020. Americas contributed $16.4 billion in revenue, representing 70% of total revenues, and $1.8 billion in operating profit. International drove $5.1 billion in revenue, 22% total revenues, and $354 million in operating profit, while Channel Development totaled $1.9 billion in revenues, 8%, and $687 million in operating profit. Finally, Corporate and Other added $66 million in revenues and a negative $1.3 billion in operating profit, which is negative due to the unallocated corporate expenses that are bucketed in this segment. Starbucks has cultivated 2 main competitive advantages. The first, supply chain. Starbucks are masters when it comes to reducing risk and cost. Starbucks sources its coffee beans from a variety of suppliers. Given Starbucks' focus on quality at scale, it sources Arabica coffee beans across the globe to refine in a consistent way. As you might expect, the coffee bean market will have its own competitive dynamics and volatility. However, Starbucks is able to manage the cost of beans by throwing around its weight as the largest coffee bean purchaser. The strategy involves fixed price and price-to-be-fixed purchase commitments, which enables Starbucks to guarantee supply at a fixed price for a later date and insulate itself from any pricing volatility in the coffee bean market. So, if the price of coffee beans skyrockets 1 month down the line, Starbucks will still pay the same low price it negotiated up front. And this is so important, given that product and distribution costs, which used to be called the Starbucks cost of sales line until they relabeled it, makes up greater than 30% of net revenue. The second competitive advantage? The brand. which takes us back to the very origin of Starbucks innovation, the in-store experience.
Starbucks spends far less than most of its competitors do on marketing. And the reason why is because customers are using that brand to make a decision, as opposed to paying attention to the latest campaign. They're able to take the Starbucks brand knowledge and turn it into something that is repeat business over and over again because they love the brand, and that brand is driving all of that loyalty.
It creates a quality experience by investing in work staff with proper training and perks, like 100% tuition coverage.
In my role as chief strategist, I was able to put the college achievement plan together. That's just an extension of all the good things that Starbucks has done over the years for people. Healthcare for part-time workers. That was unheard of back in its day. Beanstalk, which is Starbucks granting shares of stock to every single person who works in the company. Unheard of until they did it. Starbucks put its people first, and sticking to that has made the brand what it is today.
Starbucks repeatedly demonstrates its care of customers and employees, even shutting down all stores for 1 hour to conduct racial bias training for its entire crew.
One of the Starbucks mantras that I remember very clearly is, we're not in the coffee business serving people, we're in the people business serving coffee.
When you build a brand, you have to pay attention to your own people. It starts from the inside out. And that's part of the actual brand promise of Starbucks. Because at the end of the day, when you walk into a Starbucks store, you get to know the barista. And that's a people-driven business. If you don't have the right people doing the right thing, you ruin the brand promise. And Starbucks knew that from the get-go. Treating people right, treating baristas the right way, building a culture where you get the best possible talent to do something as simple as make a coffee was an incredibly important business decision, made long before I got there.
Starbucks also invests in the customer experience, offering desks and lounge chairs, free Wi-Fi, and copious power outlets to encourage people to come and stay a while. And the way they maintain all this quality across the board is their commitment to license rather than franchise. So they run everything. Finally, they're diligent in targeting prime locations for maximum traffic levels. These costs are all bundled under store operating costs, which comprise 40 to 45% of net revenue in any given year. Factoring in the product and distribution costs, store operating costs, and depreciation and amortization, we end up with a rough gross profit margin of 15 to 20%. Two things to note here. Starbucks needs its stores and machines to serve us coffee, so they allocate much of their depreciation and amortization to COGS, cost of goods sold. The second is that Starbucks historically does not report a gross profit line. Instead, it groups its product and store operating costs under OPEX, along with G&A and restructuring and impairment costs, to report an operating income line, which in fiscal year 2020 was $1.6 billion, representing a 6.6% operating margin. Here's our final order on Starbucks. Given the rise of newer and flashier coffee shops, as well as the constant competition from other chains, Starbucks will need to keep focusing on what led to its strong historical growth: quality and experience at a consistent level across all their stores. As Howard Schultz wrote about the company in his book, Pour Your Heart Into It, there was something magical about it, a passion and authenticity I had never experienced in business. Maybe, just maybe, I could be part of that magic. Maybe I could help it grow.
Also, never order a cappuccino with no foam. Just don't do it, because a cappuccino is 1/4 milk, 3/4 foam. So there's people that would come in and they would want a no foam cappuccino. We try to explain to them, you can order a latte, and that is essentially what you want. Like, no, I want a cappuccino with no foam. Starbucks says make it right, so you make it right and you make them their cappuccino with no foam.